This is the IELTS listening test. You will hear a number of different recordings and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Now turn to Part 1.
First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. You will see that there is an example which has been done for you.
Hello, my name is Dave Burns, and I'm here to tell you about the welcoming party we're having for new students. Unfortunately, the information on your invitation is inaccurate. We didn't have enough time to print new invitations, so I'll have to ask you to make changes. To start with, this isn't a welcoming lunch, it's a dance party. However, the next line is true. The party will be held at Blackwell House. Is everybody comfortable with that? The next line tells you when the party will be. Friday, June 15th at 8 p.m. But I have good news. The party will end at 11 p.m. As a result of this later end to the party, the bus will go later too. So it should read, free transport to the student hostel is available, leaving Blackwell House at 11:30. And of course, other students may attend, and all students must have their student ID card with them. I hope you can come to the welcoming party. It's a really good way to get to know other students and to learn what it's like to live in this city and to study here. Just one final change. Please let us know by Thursday if you can come.
Now listen while Dave Burns gives instructions for students who are going to travel by car to the party.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
Some of you may prefer to travel by car, but I have to warn you about some changes to the roads. You will find there is a lot of new road work on Smith Street. The work will not finish for a long time, so we can be sure that Smith Street will be a problem. If you are coming from the city, you will be able to travel easily until you get to Blackwell Street, just near the college. As you know, Blackwell Street is very long. You should avoid the corner of Blackwell Street and Jones Avenue, because they are laying telephone cable. However, you can take a detour and avoid Blackwell Street altogether. The best thing to do is to pass the roundabout and take the first road on your left, which is Brown Crescent. Brown Crescent will lead you into the college grounds, so that's easy. I hope everyone has a great time. Bring your friends, and we'll see you on Friday. Oh, one final reminder. It's best to use the side door. The front door may be locked at 7, so come to the side. See you on Friday.
That is the end of Part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 2.
You'll hear an introduction about ancient architectures. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 20. Now listen carefully to the tape and answer questions 11 to 20.
The architecture of the ancients often reflects the ideas and beliefs of that time. Some of the ancient structures can give us a glimpse into the minds of the people who built them. Now Professor Francis is going to talk to us about ancient architecture.
No story is more interesting or impressive than the story of architecture, and in particular the activities of human beings in the art of building. Let's have a look at this in some detail. Did you ever visit the pyramids? Look at this picture, please. The pyramids in Egypt are true wonders of the ancient world. Khufu's pyramid is a stunning 138-metre-high mass of 2.3 million stones, each weighing about 2.5 tons. It was built to geometrical perfection over 4,500 years ago, with simple stone and copper tools. It was so far advanced that some have suggested it was designed by aliens. Actually, there is an astronomical significance to the perfect precision of the pyramids. By using two stars that circle the sky polar point, Egyptian astronomers were able to arrange the pyramids due north. This was done because they believed the king's afterlife and the stars were closely related. They believed their pharaoh, that is, their king, had been transformed into another living being, a light in the sky in contrast to the darkness of death. Okay, now let's look at another picture. On this picture is Athens' ancient Parthenon. It is an immense columned temple, built almost entirely of marble. Athens' ancient Parthenon is a perfect model of classic Greek architecture. It was built to honour Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Therefore, it includes the ideals of logic and reason in its design. Built in the 5th century BC, the Parthenon is made up of almost 140 columns. The Greeks associated the columns with the virtues of a human being: strong, orderly, proud, and beautiful. The height and width of the Parthenon are designed with the rational logic of geometry. The upper diameter of each column is a bit narrower than its base. It bulges slightly in the middle and slants inward. This kind of optical illusion makes the columns appear more graceful and thus more beautiful. The Parthenon also symbolizes democracy. Each column supports the entire structure, just as each person contributes to the government. It symbolizes that Athens' government is democratic. Finally, I am going to introduce the Roman Colosseum, a large oval structure for public sports events, entertainment, or assemblies. The Roman Colosseum displays the practical nature and political thinking of Romans. The Colosseum was built in 80 AD, when, throughout its vast empire, Romans' population and wealth were growing. It was necessary for politicians to entertain the people in return for their support. Gladiators would battle wild animals, and even one another in order to entertain the bloodthirsty crowds. Constructed with tons of marble, the Colosseum stood 48 meters high. It has the capacity to hold up to 50,000 spectators. Spectators sat on the lower 3 levels, surrounded by towering roofed passageways. On hot days, a cover suspended from the top story provided shade from the sun. Ancient architecture gives us a sense of the different societies that build these amazing monuments. Through it, we can imagine what life was like when those civilizations were flourishing.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
You'll hear a tutor and a student talking about the history of the scientific method. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25. Hello, Simon. Come in. Take a seat. Now, I wanted to talk to you about your assignment.
Yes, the one on the scientific method.
That's right. I just wanted to see how you were getting on.
Well, I think it's fine. I mean, I haven't done a huge amount of work on it because I've been working on other things. But what I've read so far seems fine.
How many of the references that I gave you have you managed to get hold of?
Not too many, I'm afraid. It seems that everyone else is working on the same things at the same time. And every time I look, the books are checked out from the library.
Right. Well, I think that we can go over the main ground together now. That way, even if you don't manage to go through all the references in detail, you'll still have an overview. What has helped you most so far?
I've managed to have a look at 3 of them. I thought that Johnson made some good points, but it was hard to follow the line of her argument. Bradman was simple and straightforward, and I felt as if I got a lot out of that. I wish I could say the same for Whittaker. To be honest, I didn't get very far with that.
Okay, that's more or less what I'd expect. So tell me, what have you learned so far about the role of the Egyptians and the Babylonians?
Yes. Well, there's evidence that the basic components of the scientific method, examination, diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis, were being used in the early 1600s BC, especially in the treatment of certain illness.
Good. Yes, that's right. And the point, of course, is that that represented a considerable advance over relatively simple, non-empirical approaches, which usually attributed anything unknown to the actions of the gods, etc. Of course, the Egyptians and Babylonians did this as well, but what we see emerging here is a willingness to base opinion on systematic study of the real world, which is at the root of the scientific method.
I see. Right, yes. And then that reappears later.
Yes, although don't get carried away with the idea that it was a simple process of development. By the time we get to ancient Greece, let's take the period towards the middle of the 5th century BC, the rules governing the scientific method were practiced on a widespread scale, but there were still many people who believed that real truth could only be acquired by pure rational thought. Plato, of course, had a great influence on the development of the scientific method during this period.
Through his academy.
That's right. But then, as we know, a great deal of understanding of the scientific method disappeared as the old world order collapsed. It wasn't until the Middle Ages, sometime before the 11th century, that several versions of the scientific method emerged from the medieval Muslim world, all of which stressed the importance of experimentation in science.
Right. I think I've got the historical timeline.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, You have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
The other thing I'm struggling with slightly is actually pinning down precisely what we mean by the scientific method. I wonder if you could give me some pointers on that.
Sure. Well, it's best to think of the scientific method as a series of steps in a process which allows us to find answers to questions about the world around us. So the first step is to identify the problem. What is it that you want to know or explain?
And then I think the next step is designing an experiment.
But you can't design an experiment unless you know what you want your experiment to tell you.
Oh, yes. You need to form a hypothesis to be tested before you design the experiment.
So there's a very clear relationship between hypothesis and experiment. Having designed the experiment, then of course you go on to carry out the experiment. The particular procedure you follow, the protocol, will differ from experiment to experiment, but the underlying principle is the same. You analyze the data from the experiment in order to confirm or disprove your hypothesis.
Assuming the experiment is accurate.
Oh yes, if there's anything unusual about the data, or if the results are at all surprising, then you need to ask yourself whether the experiment could be flawed and whether the data could be unreliable. If the answer is yes, then it may be necessary to modify the experiment and go through the process again.
So, once you have reliable, valid results,
Then the final step is to communicate them. The wider scientific community needs to know about the results, and publication in journals is the accepted way.
okay, I think I've got the basics.
It's going to get more complicated as we begin to look at some people who have criticized the scientific method. So you need to make sure that you understand things up to this point. Let me know if you have any further problems with it.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
You'll hear a lecture on MSG. First, you have some time to read questions 32 to 41. Now listen to the conversation and answer questions 32 to 41. You've probably noticed that MSG appears regularly among the ingredients of your favorite foods. But what is it? How long has it been used? How is it used? MSG, or monosodium glutamate, is a chemical commonly used to add flavor to salty or sour tasting foods. The average person knows almost nothing about it, but today MSG is found in everything from potato chips to soup. Its principal component is an amino acid called glutamic acid or glutamate. It was identified by Professor Kikuné Ikeda in 1908, but Eastern cooks have been using glutamate-rich seaweed as flavouring for more than 1,200 years. Glutamate is found in two forms: bound glutamate, which is linked to other amino acids forming a protein molecule, and free glutamate, that has no link to protein. Only free glutamate is effective in enhancing the flavour of food. Foods often used for their flavouring qualities, such as tomatoes and mushrooms, have high levels of naturally occurring free glutamate. MSG is usually produced through fermentation of corn, sugar beets, or sugar cane. The finished product is a pure white crystal, which dissolves easily and blends well in many foods. Monosodium glutamate enhances the basic flavour of many foods. New studies also show that MSG elicits a unique taste that is known as umami in Japan and often described by Americans as a savoury, broth-like or meaty taste. Umami may be the fifth basic taste, beyond salty, sweet, sour and bitter. As an integral part of cuisines around the world, this savoury taste is common to the bouillons of Europe, the oyster sauce of China, the soy and fish sauces of Southeast Asia, the pizza of Italy, and the chowders and stews of America. MSG helps bring out the best natural flavours in a variety of foods such as meat, poultry, seafood, and vegetables. While MSG harmonises well with salty and sour tastes, it contributes little or nothing to sweet or bitter foods. Results of taste panel studies indicate that a level of 0.1 to 0.8% MSG by weight in food provides optimum enhancement of the food's natural flavour. This is within the range of glutamate that naturally occurs in foods. Approximately 1/2 teaspoon of MSG is an effective amount to enhance the flavour of a pound of meat or 4 to 6 servings of vegetables or soup. MSG is a self-limiting substance. Once the proper amount is used, adding more contributes little to food flavour. Overuse of MSG, as with many other seasonings and spices, may cause some foods to have an undesirable taste. There is simply no substitute for wholesome quality food and good cooking techniques. MSG makes good quality food taste better, but will not improve the flavour of poor quality food. Disturbingly, scientists have known since the 1960s that MSG kills brain cells in young animals. Further research suggested that MSG may also be responsible for ailments ranging from skin rashes to irregular heartbeat and depression. Reports vary on just what percentage of the population is sensitive to MSG. One researcher put the figure as high as 30%. But food industry-sponsored studies have suggested it as low as 1 to 2%. Baby food manufacturers agreed to take MSG out of their products in the 1970s, but it is still widely used in other foods. This is because MSG is an economical way of stimulating great taste. If you're making a chicken stew but can't afford a whole chicken, why not use a little chicken and a lot of MSG? Consumer groups in the USA campaign regularly against its use, but for many of us, MSG will continue to be a part of everyday life. Food, it seems, will always be a matter of personal taste.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.